hits for the bench. Extra attacker coming on to even things up. To the net, Albertson scores!
The Extra Attackers Podcast with Maude and Jordan.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Extra Attackers Podcast. After a little bit of a long holiday break, we are finally back, Maude and Jordan here once again, and today we're throwing it back a little bit to our very first episode where we made standings predictions for the 23-24 NHL season, and we had some good ones and some not so great predictions. So we thought it would be fun to look back on that here today and call out our bad takes as well as acknowledge the ones that we actually were right on. So it's going to be fun, eh, Jordan?
Yeah, I think so. I'm excited. I think we did okay overall, just looking at it. But there's a couple that were really bad. So I'm intrigued to talk about.
Yeah,
same here.
And with 32 teams in the league, it's hard to call all of their seasons perfectly, and there's always going to be a few outliers in terms of teams that people didn't expect to be really good or really bad. With so much parity in the league, it seems like there's always a couple of teams that just do way worse than you expect because the bottom teams are able to punch above their weight a little bit too. So there's some doozies for sure.
It's an understatement. But we figured we get started right off at the top with our division winners. So the very first team we're going to talk about here is Dallas. We predicted them to win their division. And I mean, I'm feeling pretty good about that one. They're 7th in the NHL right now. Their personnel is very good. I've always talked about how much I like their roster, so I'm not really surprised by this one. I think this one was more of a slam dunk.
Yeah, they're scoring a lot of goals lately, especially. And I think I heard a stat. I'm just like double checking it. When I was watching the highlights of their game against the Wild the other day, the commentator said that Dallas is the only team with 7 skaters who have double-digit goal totals, which was with Matt Duchene just got to that mark. Wyatt Johnson, whatever his last goal was, that was his 10th goal. So the absolute scoring depth on the Stars has been super impressive, and they were our pick to lead the division. Not quite in first place right now, but they're definitely going to be a playoff lock.
I'm just happy that we predicted a team that we thought would be good is actually still doing well.
Yeah.
So good for us.
For sure. And then in the other Western division, we had Vegas as the division leader, and they were leading the division for quite a while, although a certain team that we're going to get to later has dethroned them. But despite a slump lately, Vegas's record is still really good overall, right?
Yeah, they're still second in the division with a record of 23-13-5. So they're still doing incredibly well. And I want to say, like, even though they're not the division leaders right now, they were for like a decent portion of the season so far. So like this one, it's not a direct hit, but I'd say it's kind of 50-50 for us overall. So yeah, I'm generally happy with that one too.
Yeah, and I do think that Vancouver, who we'll get into a little bit later, does have a bit of a potential to slip a little bit in the second half of the season, although they're obviously going to make the playoffs. So I could easily see Vegas taking that division title still, especially since like 3-7-0 in their last 10 looks really bad, but we know that they're better than that. So and they have some injuries too. Like Shea Theodore has been out for like 2 months now, I think. Quite a while.
I have him on my fantasy team, so
I have him on one too, and it's been annoying. And Aiden Hill has been injured for a while now too. So if they had those guys, and I think William Karlsson is injured currently too. Last night I was watching Vegas versus Colorado, and I saw a couple of defensemen that they had out there for Vegas that I just literally didn't know who they were from looking at them and looking at their numbers. I think Lucas Cormier was one of them who I at least. You know what? I don't remember if Lucas is actually his first name, but I at least know him from like NHL GM mode because he has potential.
Sounds familiar.
Has potential.
I'm inclined to you're right.
And then there was another defenseman that I don't even know who it was. So they've had to call some guys up and try to replace people because of injuries. So it hasn't gone too smoothly with that, but I think this is a team that will stay the course for the rest of the season and figure it out.
Yeah, their recent slip, I don't think it's entirely their fault. So, well, I think we'll see them maybe not get into the top spot again, but I think they have a solid grasp on second right now.
Then over to the East, our division winner picks are not nearly as good in the
Mon,
Eastern
the East is gonna
Conference.
be rough. Not gonna
Yep.
lie.
We probably called the West mostly better than the East, I think, overall.
Oh, I'd say absolutely.
But starting in the Metro Division, we picked the Devils to win the division, and they are currently not even in a playoff spot at the time of this recording. They are 1 point behind our other division pick for the Atlantic Division in the Tampa Bay Lightning, who are in the final wildcard spot. On the topic of New Jersey, though, the one thing is that they do have a decent amount of games in hand on some of the other teams. They've only played 38. Tampa's played 42. Islanders have played 40. Most of the teams in their division have played 40. So little bit of runway for the Devils to catch up, but I totally did not expect them to be where they are so far.
Yeah, this one was kind of surprising to me. I still think they have the personnel to do really well, and their game has obviously slipped. I think they're better than this. It is important to say that they have been dealing with injuries. Dougie Hamilton's been injured, I think, most of the season, and he's not coming back until the playoffs if they make it there. Jack Hughes has been injured like a couple times, and I think he's injured again, and that's a vital piece. Shea didn't start the season playing; he was injured for a little bit. So they've had to deal with a lot of injury troubles, which is never good, especially since it's mostly top players. Um, but I still thought their talent could get around that a little bit. And I did like Lindy Ruff as a coach, but it's just kind of been slipping. I do think, of course, it's still not even halfway through the season. They have a lot of runway to make that up. It's closing quickly, but they still have it. And I think they're going to be intriguing to watch down the stretch because this is a team that was expected to do well after doing well last year, after finally breaking out of that rebuild purgatory they were kind of in. So seeing how this group responds, I think is going to be pretty telling of their future.
Yep, you're 100% right about the injuries too. Um, Hamilton being out is brutal, especially because he missed a lot of time like a couple of seasons ago too. And the one bright side of that is that you get to give a lot more ice time to Luke Hughes and Simon Nemec, which I think will be good for the development of this team to get those guys more used to playing top 4 minutes in the NHL. I think Nemec was in the AHL until Hamilton's injury, so at least he's getting some experience out of this, and he's a huge part of the future. The main thing, though, is those Jack Hughes injuries, because before his first injury this season, he was like the Hart Trophy frontrunner for the first month or so. He was just absolutely electric, and he seemed like he could challenge McDavid for best player in the league in my mind. But then those injuries have slowed him down. So there's not much you can do about that when your very best guys are getting injured like that. And then the other thing that's holding the Devils back is that goaltending. They really need to figure out a solution in net before the trade deadline, because I hate Vitek Vanacek now for having him on 2 fantasy teams and now having him on 0 fantasy teams for obvious reasons. And then like their other options haven't been great either. Like Akira Schmid got sent back to the AHL. Maybe he'll be an option to come back up later in the season. And then he was replaced by Nico Dawes, who hadn't played in over a year because of injuries. So again, another injured player having to come back. He's been decent so far, but it's probably not the guy they want to rely on. So the Devils, I think if they can acquire a solid goalie to play in tandem with either Vanacek or Schmid, they're going to be surging. They're going to be surging back into the playoffs pretty quickly here. I'd be surprised if they miss, even though they are currently on the outside.
They have the talent that should put them there automatically, even with their injuries. Goaltending is a big deal, and I mean before Hellebuck signed in Winnipeg, there was a lot of talk about maybe him being traded there or that being a top destination. So I do wonder what they're going to do with the goalie position around the trade deadline, because all the other options aren't nearly as attractive. And frankly, most teams that are on the fringe or that are doing pretty well are looking for a goalie right now. It's a pretty common thing in the NHL. Teams like Toronto, Buffalo, even though I don't think they'll go out and really get anyone. So they're going to have competition for that. You kind of hope that Akira Schmid might have done a little bit better, considering how he did pretty well in the playoffs. He did pretty well. But the answer hasn't been that. So they're going to have to explore other avenues.
Mm-hmm. And then goaltending was also a very big topic for the other team we picked to win their division in the Eastern Conference, which was the Tampa Bay Lightning, not having Andrei Vasilevsky until about 3 weeks ago when he returned. And he's been up and down so far. He's had some good games and some really bad games as he's trying to get back into shape and back into form. But the Lightning currently sit in the last wildcard spot. As I said earlier, very good record on home ice, but pretty bad record on the road, which I find is often pretty common with wildcard teams. The teams that aren't at the top of the league, they usually are better on home ice. But anyway, do you think at this point, since we had chosen the Lightning to win the division, do you think that they are even going to make the playoffs? Or do you think they will get in, or do you think they're going to slip out?
God, I do wonder if they're going to slip out. I do have to take ownership because I kind of pushed for the Lightning
You
to be
did.
the
You
top
totally
seed.
did.
This is kind of my fault. I was expecting them to come back after a long rest. And to be fair, I think I made that prediction before I knew Vasilevsky was going to be injured.
Yeah, I think we
Um,
did.
I'm pretty sure we did. So that would have obviously contributed. Um, but yeah, I do think they're kind of getting older. They've lost a lot of talent because of the cap, and they're one of the teams that I think has had to suffer the most because of the hard cap incurred by the pandemic. So they've lost, like I said, a lot of talent. The players that they've used to plug those holes haven't always worked as well as I think they would hope, like players like Tyler Janot and things like that. Um, so I think they're kind of coming to the end of their dynasty as their players age up, and I do wonder if just the age and the fatigue after doing so well for so long is finally kind of catching up to them. And I wonder if those just kind of slowly slip out for another team like the Devils over the course of the rest of the season as they get more tired.
I agree. Like, I think when we made our original predictions, I was saying more second in the division for Tampa, and I was basically thinking they have the talent that they should be able to just cruise into a playoff spot. But in my mind, they were like an obvious first round exit, and it seems like they might not be able to get second in the division at this point. They could go on a run because Kucherov has been way better than everyone expected this year, and just
True.
kind of putting the team on his back. So he could have just another huge heater in the second half of the season and have them go up the standings a little bit. But I do feel like this is the beginning of the end for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I would still put them in the playoffs just because, well, unless the Devils take that final wildcard spot, because other than that, like, I don't know what other team that's close for the wildcard spot that I really think is better than Tampa. There's a bunch of teams that are like 1 point behind them, but I would like give Tampa the edge over all those other teams that we'll discuss later. So not the best season for Tampa, but I do think they still are a playoff team, and we definitely overrated them in the preseason.
Yeah, that's definitely my fault. But there's a lot of unforeseen circumstances, and they're just getting older, so
Mhm.
it's not super surprising.
From there, the second seeds in each division, I think we had a pretty good hit rate, or a pretty good percentage here. Saying that Colorado would be second in the Central, they currently are. Saying that Carolina would be second in the Metro, they currently are. The Leafs saying that they would be second in the Atlantic, they're in third, so that's not too bad. The really bad one is the Edmonton Oilers saying that they would be second in the Pacific. However, they are now finally in a playoff spot in the wild card. So
Hey.
they do have a chance at maybe getting second in their division, but it would be really tough at this point. This is probably the one like prediction that we had that was way off that we can totally give ourselves the benefit of the doubt for, because they were so bad at the beginning of the season, and then with basically the exact same roster other than switching Jack Campbell out, they've been so good. They've had like an 8 game win streak, and they're on another 8 game win streak now. I think it is. It's like 2 8 game win streaks already with the new coach. So it's like exact same roster, and it's Jekyll and Hyde. So do you think they'll keep it up for the rest of the season, or do you think they'll run out of gas a little bit? And do you think they'll not be able to keep up that pace and maybe slip out of the wild card spot?
I think their pace right now is a bit too insane to keep up. Like in the span of like 2 months, they have 2 8 game winning streaks, which is like incredible. That's insane. I do think they'll slow down, but I don't think it's going to be enough to push them out. Honestly, like the story of Edmonton's so interesting because I don't really know for sure what happened. I still think Jay Woodcroft is a good coach, and I don't think what happened initially was necessarily his fault. but Chris Knobloch has been getting wins, so maybe he's doing something differently that we just can't see internally. And I do think they just have too much star power not to make it. McDavid has hit a stride again. Instead of being a fantasy disappointment, he's gone up for me.
Ugh.
Thank God.
Draisaitl is still disappointing me, unfortunately. Doing
I'm
a little
sorry.
better lately, but he's not getting those like big multi-point nights. He's just getting like maybe one goal or one assist every night.
Yeah, like there, he hasn't exactly picked it up yet, but as a team, they clearly have, and that's the most important thing. Um, and honestly, like this row of guesses is it's really good. Like we mentioned it, like Colorado, Carolina, and then the Leafs being 1 point off. And again, I don't think you can blame us on Edmonton, like you said. I don't think anyone foresaw what was going to happen, and even what's happening now, like you said, they could end up second. Maybe by the end of the season, our prediction is correct. But yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about these ones.
And even the Leafs, that are the kind of more shaky one because they aren't currently second in the division. And no one could have predicted how bad Ilya Samsonov has been. So I feel like if you just, again, there was this stat that was kind of goofy that was like, oh, if you remove every game played by Ilya Samsonov, the Leafs have the best goaltending save percentage in the league, which is stupid, but you can also say that no one expected him to be that bad. If he was even just like league average save percentage, they'd probably be second in the division, get a few more wins out of his starts, especially with those multiple overtime losses to Columbus, where it's just like, if he could have made one extra save in each of those games, then they win easily. You can give the Leafs a little bit of the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, and as well, those two regulation losses against Ottawa is kind of tough
Yeah,
to
how
stomach.
I don't
know
oh my
how that
God.
happened,
It's
but
so funny. And they had 2 losses against Chicago as well. They lose to the funny teams and then they beat the good teams. It's so funny.
I forget the exact number, but the record against bottom 5 teams is actually bad. Like
Yeah,
it's
it has to
negative,
be.
and I don't know why.
It's so funny. Even the Ducks, when they played them last week, it was really close. Like, Dostal made 55 saves, and the Leafs didn't score until like 5 minutes left in the game, and then won in overtime. So at least they had 2 games where they destroyed the Sharks, because everyone destroys the Sharks this year, at least. So they had that at least. They're not funny enough to lose to the Sharks, which is disappointing, but they like losing to the Sens, so at least we have that.
Exactly. And before we move on, I do want to say for both Carolina and Colorado, Nathan McKinnon is going off. He's going absolutely insane. That definitely helped them out. The talent on that team is incredible. Makar, Rantanen, and McKinnon, like I said before, it's hard to lose like that. So props to them. And also Carolina, they've had one of the worst save percentages with their goalies in the NHL, still second.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a testament to how the rest of the team is kind of pulling them along here. So that in and of itself is very impressive. So not a lot to say because we were kind of bang on and they're just doing well, but I wanted to highlight those instances.
And then the third seeds for each division. The Kings, pretty good prediction. They're currently in third. Then the other 3 are all varying degrees of kind of bad takes. First one being Minnesota Wild, currently not in a playoff spot at all. And they were getting close for a little bit there, but now they've totally sunk their chances in the last 2 weeks. They're not even close at this point. That one, I feel like we can kind of blame injuries again, just because in the last couple of weeks, their losing basically started when Kaprizov got injured. He's still out, and they've also been missing Spurgeon and Brodin, which is basically your entire top defense pair right there. But they're not able to do what the Oilers can do and just put up those amazing 8-game win streaks. Even though they had a good stretch after firing the coach, they don't have as much top end talent where they can sustain that sort of pace, and we're seeing it now where they're coming back down to earth after the new coach bump. So this was one of our bad takes, eh?
Yeah, it's not great, and I do think looking back, I probably should have considered how the Parise and the Suter buyouts affected how they could build their team. Like thinking about it now, we really should have put them in one of probably the second wild card is probably what I would have gone with, and even though that's not right, I think it's closer. Because like that's something like 14 million tied up in 2 player buyouts, and it's really hard to make a roster around that, especially when you're giving Marcus Foligno 4 million after that. So they just don't really have the depth to push themselves into a better spot. And even though some players like Eriksson Ek is having a really good season, it doesn't make up for everything.
Hmm.
So in hindsight, should have rated them lower based off of the circumstances. But again, injuries don't help. And Gustafsson has been much worse than last season. He was like close to Vesna caliber last season. He's not been that this season, and that hurts too.
He was actually doing a lot better after the coaching change, but then he's been injured for over a week now, and Fleury just hasn't been picking up the slack. They had Jesper Waldstelt in last night for his first ever game, and they allowed 7 goals in his first game, which made me really
poor
sad.
guy.
I hate to see that with a rookie goalie. Especially since the game before that, Dallas had a rookie, Matt Murray, in net. Not the usual Matt Murray, but he got his first NHL shutout against the Wild, and then they rematched with Wallstout in net, and then their top young goalie stud allowed 7, which was really sad. But I'm glad that you brought up the buyouts, because I'm really fascinated to see what the Wild are going to do next year, and at the deadline this year too, whether or not they sell, because you want to stay competitive while you still have Kaprizov, and you don't want to go into a retool with his contract kind of being up in the air in the next couple of years whenever it expires. But you still have that cap penalty next year, so how the hell are you going to improve this team with how they are currently? The depth just isn't quite there. Well, actually, I don't think their depth is that bad, but it's just that you can't fit in any more top end talent, really. You basically need Marco Rossi to become like a number 1C next season while he's still on his entry level deal. And
Yeah.
at least Brock Faber is apparently a first pairing D while being on his entry level deal, so maybe things like that will help. But
Dude is insane.
Yeah, but it's gonna be
respect.
really tough. I don't know what they're gonna do.
Yeah, I honestly don't. Still thinking back, I don't know why they did the Suter Prizo buyouts, because I think they're paying more money overall in the buyouts after. I could be wrong. It might be a little less now that I'm thinking about it. But I'm still surprised that they went that route, because I think if they waited a couple seasons, the buyout penalty was way less.
Mm-hmm.
And now they've just kind of hamstrung themselves. And you're right that their depth isn't that bad, but it creates a situation where if one top 6 player gets injured, you don't really have anyone to slot in who's of that caliber. So that part of it changes things. But yeah, Brock Faber has been fantastic. So I gotta give credit to him. He's should be up there in the Calder race for how good he's been.
Mm-hmm. I think at this point he's probably gonna get a nomination, especially with Connor Bedard missing a lot of time. Like, he's obviously gonna run away with it anyway, but it's pretty obvious to me that Faber is one of the top 3 after that.
Exactly, yeah.
But the other 3 seeds that we called are not the best takes, but for different reasons. Is that the Rangers and the Bruins both currently lead their divisions. So we had the Devils and Tampa as division leaders. These are the teams that we should have had, apparently. And I think the Rangers, I don't have much of a problem with how we called it, because I was thinking it will be very close between the Devils, the Hurricanes, and the Rangers, like separated by just a couple of points each or something. So slotting the Rangers third, I feel like it wasn't really much of a slight to them. It was like entirely possible that they could have been first in the division, and it seems like they will win it this year if they keep their pace. But Boston, I think, is the more interesting one, where we keep trying to predict Boston's downfall, and it just never happens. And honestly, it makes me angry.
I think if I remember correctly, that was one of the ones where I was like, yeah, we should put them third seed. You were leaning more towards wild card.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
I was just scared because I'm like, you lose your top 2 centers in the same season. There's no way you should be as good. And then I was just like, I'm scared. I'm gonna say that, and they're gonna be really good, and they are. I don't know how they keep doing it. Jim Montgomery is a hell of a coach. Their
Yeah.
goaltending tandem is insane. Respect to that. And then as for the Rangers, I remember they started the season off a little shaky. And when that happened, I was like, okay, no, I feel like pretty comfortable, but they've completely turned it around. Zabinajad has been way better lately after a horrifically slow start. And I think Panarin is doing fantastic as well. So their top end players are really putting in the work, and it's showing in the standings.
Yeah, it's a couple of teams that are really carried by their top end players, even though they both do have really good depth, and obviously Boston with the defense and goaltending. It's Pasternak and Panarin leading the way. So those guys are just kind of in the tier below, McDavid and Draisaitl, where they're just kind of undeniable every season, and they're able to lead their teams to success. Apparently, Pasternak can do it without Bergeron. Wasn't sure if he could, but he can.
Yeah, no, it's been impressive. And I mean, they had that that rookie who went to the World Juniors. What's his name? It starts with a P.
Poitras.
That's it.
I don't know if I pronounced it right, but
I think that's right. He just came in and was basically like a top six forward for them. I
mhm.
think he slowed down a little bit, and then that's why he got sent. But so the way they're able to plug holes with players you wouldn't necessarily expect is just crazy. I don't know how they keep doing it.
It's super impressive, and it makes me jealous as a fan of a certain team over
Certain other
here,
team.
which we'll get to a little bit later. But the teams that we thought would be the top wild cards in each conference, we had the Penguins and the Kraken, which as of now I feel like are okay predictions because the Penguins are only 1 point behind the Lightning with a few games in hand. Um, at this point, I think I would say they probably won't make it, but they're at least in the conversation. So I don't think that was too bad of a take from us. And the Kraken are also tied with the Oilers for the last wild card, but they've played 3 more games. So again, they're just outside there. They're in the conversation. I feel like both of these are pretty lukewarm takes.
Yeah, lukewarm is a good way to describe it. And honestly, like I did think a team like Pittsburgh would be better just because of the acquisition of Carlson. And I mean, to be fair, their best players haven't really been the problem so far this season. It just seems to be a team thing overall. They just can't they can't finish games the same way they used to. And I do think age is a component of that
Mm-hmm.
too. Granted, Crosby's been insane. And then as for Seattle, they've had kind of a roller coaster of a season, and they do lack like solid top end talent on that team. Like you can arguably say Vince Dunn is a top player. You can arguably
Mm-hmm.
say that Beniers will become a top
Man,
player.
I would say Vince Dunn is their best player currently. He's been awesome
Oh,
this
he
season.
is. Yeah, no, he's fantastic, and it kind of came out of nowhere. I never expected this out of him. So they don't really have like I feel like they don't have enough superstars at this point to really propel them into sustained success. Last year, that was kind of what helped them a lot was their depth. Their depth scoring throughout their lineup really pushed them far in the playoffs. Now, when it hasn't been clicking as much, you're starting to see the issue where they're not scoring as many goals, and then that can't overcome even low scoring games where they lose like 3-2, 2-1. You're seeing that a bit more. So it's going to be interesting how they finish. I'm wondering if they're going to have a bit of resurgence later, or if this is kind of who they are, and if they're just going to settle behind Edmonton. It's going to be interesting to see. And I agree that it's pretty lukewarm as a take.
I think if I had to call it right now, I don't think I would have them making the playoffs for the final result this season, just because they've been carried like very heavily by Joey Decord in the last 3 weeks. They're
Yeah,
8-0-2 in the last 10, and he's just been insanely good. And I think he will continue to be good. But like you said, with those low scoring games, they can't keep going like this like every game. Just winning 2-1, 3-2, with amazing goaltending, especially like starting him so much, he's probably going to start to get burnt out a little bit. He's never had this type of workload, at least in the NHL in his career. I don't know if he had any AHL seasons where he played a lot. I know last year he was the MVP in the AHL playoffs, so obviously he played a ton then. So maybe that will help out a little bit, but I think they're carried a little bit too much by the goaltending right now, so I think I would favor Edmonton ahead of them. Although you could argue that they have the goaltending strength, whereas Edmonton doesn't. So depending on how much you value that, it could be possible that Edmonton's goaltending lets them down, and Seattle's continues doing well enough to get them into that final spot. But I feel like where we predicted them to be was a pretty good one, especially compared
agreed.
to what we had for the second wildcard spot for both conferences. I would say first of all, the Calgary Flames in the West, it's kind of a bad take, but at least they're not as bad as they were at the beginning of the season. This could have been a much worse take than it is currently, because they're not super close to the playoffs, but at least they have a 500 record at the moment.
Well, they're only 2 points back of Seattle and
Is it
Edmonton.
two? Yeah. Oh, yeah, it is two.
Granted, Edmonton has played four less games, so
Mm-hmm.
inevitably that's going to change to like a wider gap. But
Yeah.
it's pretty close. I would lean towards this as more of a lukewarm take. And thinking about like what happened to the team last season and kind of how they've gone on operating this season, we probably should have left them out of the playoffs in favor of some other teams that we'll see lower down the list. But I'd say overall it's a lukewarm take.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that the main problem here with Calgary is just that Jonathan Huberdeau has been so much worse than anyone expected. I think most people thought he would have at least a decent bounce back season to be at least like 60 to 70 points. And he's trending to be even worse than he was last season, which is just shocking. I don't know how it's gotten to this point this fast when he still has an 8-year deal. I think he's just in the first year of that deal, right? Or maybe the second year. But either way, if he was performing up even to like a 70-point pace, that might have them like in a wild card spot. I still like a lot of their players on paper, but it just seems like they don't have the high-end talent due to a guy like him underperforming.
Yeah, that seems to be a bit factor. Although I will say, like lately, I think he has like 6 points in 7 games or something like that.
Yeah, a
like,
little better lately.
He's starting to pick it up, and hopefully, like I do feel for the guy. That must be like an awful situation to be in, and I do hope he can kind of get back to where he used to be. But losing that production, especially when that was swapped out with Matthew Tkachuk, and even though Mackenzie Weegar is good, he doesn't really bridge the gap in terms of scoring. He's more of a defensive-oriented defenseman. So yeah, they're kind of missing like required pieces.
It's funny you say that because I think Uyghur leads their team in goals, or like something really stupid. Let me look up his stats because he's actually getting the point production back a little bit this year, especially relatively on. Okay, he leads the blue line in goals, but 9 goals from a defenseman. That's
pretty good,
and that's 4th on their whole team. So that shows you that the forwards are not really picking up the slack. So yeah, Wegner is doing quite good, but he can't do it all himself.
No, and I do have to give him credit. I think last year was particularly bad, but he seems to be bouncing back more than Huberdeau, so hopefully that helps. And Markstrom is doing pretty okay, especially last season. I think he has like a 905, 906, something in that range. So he's doing all right, especially with what's average league wide. And I think that's kind of helped them at least be close, but I don't think it's enough to get them into the playoffs.
And then up next, we have our very worst take of all of our predictions, is that we thought that the Sens would be a playoff team. Wanna take it away, Jordan?
Sure. I will say second wild card, so we said barely a playoff team, to be fair. And I still think, even though it might be delusional at this point, that they have the roster to do it. But what's happened to this team this season has been absolutely catastrophic. You, of course, had the Pinto suspension, which was the first big news story. Then you had the Evgeny Dadonov situation, which was the next big news story, and we'll probably end up losing a first in the next couple of years because of that. And then, of course, you had to fire DJ eventually because it got so bad. I think he was fired after like a 6-3, 6-2 loss against Vegas where the team just didn't show up whatsoever. And honestly, like what's happening to the Sens is something that needs to be studied in sports psychology. It's absolutely incredible. The amount of times they have blown leads that they've had going to the third period is insane. Like they'll be up like 4-2 and then they manage to lose 6-4. Whenever they get scored on first, it's a way to get the ball rolling, and then they're down 5-1 by the end of the period, or 5-0 in one specific case before the end of the period. They have no mental fortitude to recover from anything. As soon as the first drop of adversity hits them, they've just been turtling and they can't do anything. And this is all after they've made several changes. They brought in Jacques Martin at first just to be consulted to help DJ out. After that, continued to be terrible. They switched it to Jacques Martin as the full-time coach after firing DJ. I think that's the right decision. I think he helps them out with defensive structure and things like that, which is their biggest weakness. But they are like just hurling towards a bottom 5 finish. And honestly, at this point, watching most of the games, I would be extremely surprised if they finished anywhere else instead of bottom 5. And I do think at this point, you need to start thinking about a big trade to shake up the roster. And I think that could involve a player that might have been labeled as part of the core last season. So it's going to be interesting to watch, but God, we were wrong on this one.
Especially since this is Pierre Dorian's core and he is no longer around. You have different people evaluating that core right now and the results are not good. So outside of like 2, maybe 3 players, I don't think anyone's untouchable on this team at this point. And what's really sad for me is that we didn't even get to enjoy a new coach bump. Like, we talked about Minnesota at least having fun for 15 games before it fell off the rails. And obviously, Edmonton, you couldn't expect it to be as good as that. But the Sens' stats in pretty much every category are worse after the coaching change, which has just been the most depressing part to me, is that we didn't even get to have any hope or any copium or anything like that. And to just be able to turn around and say, like, oh, well, this team is still really talented. Look at how there's still all this potential here. It's just gotten worse. And like you said, I think a lot of it has to do with the mentality of the players, that they're just really struggling mentally. Like, they crumble as soon as anything doesn't go their way. If they're going to win a game, they basically need everything to go perfectly from puck drop, basically. And they need to just like score first and never lose the lead or never have it tied. Otherwise, they're going to lose. It's really painful to watch, and every game has been so predictable that it turned me into a betting person just to bet against the Sens constantly. And I've only been wrong once in terms of betting on the outcome of the game, when I thought they would actually beat the Devils, and they got smoked 6-2.
I was at that game.
Yeah, yeah. I'm
great.
sure that was real fun.
Loved that.
That was the only time that I picked the Sens to lose and I was wrong. Like, I lost some other bets where maybe I parlayed saying like, oh, the Sens would win, but Matthews would score or something like that. But hey, they still won, so I was still right about that outcome. But most of the time, it's betting on the Sens to lose because it's just so predictable at this point, where they never come from behind to tie a game. So basically, as soon as they're losing, you know it's done. And even when they have a multi-goal lead, you can't even expect it to end well at this point with the amount of blown leads at this point. It's totally stupid. It feels like a nightmare. I'm like, with the timing of when this episode is going to go out, I can talk about this, but no more game over shows. I'm kind of glad that I don't have to cover this team for the rest of this season. Obviously, I'm sad that I won't be doing the shows anymore because it's a lot of fun, but the team made it not so fun this season, and the rest of this year was just going to be like... And the rest of this year at this point is just going to be probably tuning out of a lot of games and looking forward to draft rankings and stuff like that. Something that we as a fan base thought that we were done having to pay attention to draft rankings. So it's just really depressing. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, that's really just it. And I mean, there's a lot of blame to go around. The goalies haven't been great either. That's a contributor. The defense, like, obviously has been rough. They haven't been able to box out players very well, and they allow a lot of high danger chances. So there's a lot of things working together. But I mean, you see like players like Cam Talbot and other goalies leave the Sens and immediately have success.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so clear that a big contributor to what destroys a goalie's confidence and what's also affecting their stats is just how they play the game. And Brady, Timmy, and even Sanderson, they all, especially Timmy, have a crazy case of the yips right now. Like Timmy specifically just can't get anything going. He cannot score a goal to save his life. And every single play he seems to start seems to die. I don't really know what you do. I think at this point you just have to hold the players accountable. And that's, again, I want to really harp on the fact that I think DJ Smith is a good person, but I really think he's done permanent damage to this team with how lackadaisical he coached.
Mm-hmm.
And it was temporarily successful in cases like last season, but it's super clear now that when things don't go well, they don't know how to handle it because they were never taught. And I think that one of the reasons we didn't get the new coaching bump is because you kind of had to start at this like gross interior of what this team was, instead of just changing the system. Like, this is just a deep-seated issue that it's not like it's going to take like a month for Jacques Martin to dig it out.
Mm-hmm. It was like starting at rock bottom, almost starting at like less than zero in terms of taking over this team, because it's not just like, oh, here's all the obvious problems that the old coach had with his system. We had that, but on top of that, it's how these players who have only ever played for this coach in the NHL, how they were used to being coached and how they were used to being told how to play hockey in the NHL was not cutting it, and they have to adapt to actual changes, and the results haven't been good so far. It's shocking. I think I tweeted this once, but this team literally needs the therapist from season 2 of Ted Lasso.
They really do.
It literally feels like that, where they just like, you start season 2 of Ted Lasso and it's like, oh, the team has the yips now. They suck and they need someone to help them. It's literally just that in real life, and it's really depressing.
It is really depressing, and it's just kind of sad to be a Sens fan after I think it's 7 years now where they're not going to make the playoffs. And Unfortunately for me, I became like more of a hardcore fan after the 2017 run.
Bad timing. Really
Really
bad
bad
timing.
timing. I was like a fan before then, but I wasn't really into like the prospects and
Mm-hmm.
things like that as much. And I didn't watch like every game like I do now. But after seeing that run, it was kind of like, oh, this is what it could feel like. So I really got into it, and I apparently chose the 7 worst years to do that.
Yeah. Oh
Um,
God.
and that's just been really disheartening. And honestly, it's made me question if I want to keep watching them this season. And I know I'll
Mm-hmm.
always be back to a certain extent because I do like watching the games, but I've started clocking out. Like I'll watch a period, I stop watching, and like cases where I'm hanging out with my girlfriend and they're playing, I won't even ask her to watch the game because I'm
Yeah.
just like, yeah, I don't really care. Like we'll
Mm-hmm.
see what happens. And yeah, I think the main way to fix this at this point is a sports psychologist, like you said, but also a big trade to the core. And honestly, I think for me, my pick would be to trade Shabbat if you can get something for him at this point. I think that would be the right move. And I think he's the odd man out in terms of what this team is built of right now. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll see what happens, but it sucks to be saying that.
Yeah, so that was without a doubt our worst prediction from the preseason is
Easily.
that Ottawa sucks complete ass and is not going to get anywhere near the playoffs, and Lord knows if they'll even be able to fix this for next year. It's looking like literally everything is being questioned in Ottawa at this point. So
Should be.
that has to take the cake as our worst prediction.
Yes.
There are a couple other bad ones though as we go into like the lower parts of the standings and our predictions. I will just pick out a few. Is that we had first of all the Panthers as missing the playoffs. And
That was bad.
while we're on the topic of the Atlantic Division, I feel like this one was the one that was basically the victim of us being too much of homers for the Sens, because if we were able to be truthful with ourselves and say like the Sens probably won't make it in a tough division, then it would be like obviously Florida getting into that playoff spot instead.
That's a good point. Yeah, they've like at the same time, I that's a good point, but I do think that like with the injuries to Ekblad and Montour to start the season and Sam Bennett,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really think that they were going to be able to overcome that.
Mm-hmm.
Especially after a deep playoff run where all the players are still kind of fatigued and things like that.
Yeah,
But
like Matthew Tkachuk had a really slow start, and somehow
he
they were
did.
fine. It's insane.
It's all Sam Reinhart. He's been absolutely
Mm-hmm.
insane out of nowhere. Um, but yeah, we didn't give them the credit they deserved, and I agree that that's probably a little bit of homerism sneaking its way in there. And they deserved probably to be in the second wild card at the very least. But I mean, they've even surpassed that. So that's just credit to where credit's due to Florida.
You have to give huge credit to their general manager Bill Zito for all of the depth that he brought in, especially on defense, to cover up for those injuries in the first 2 months of the season. Because I totally thought that they were gonna have a rough start, even if it was just like around 500 until those defensemen in Montour and Ekblad were back. But no, they by the time those guys came back to the lineup, I think they were like 10-4-4 or something like that, like something stupid, where they were just perfectly fine with this like ragtag defensive core with Oliver Ekman-Larsson playing like 24 minutes a night. So I love that when a GM is able to find those players who can fill in the gaps. And it made me jealous as a Sens fan early in the season when we were all just like, oh, Shabbat's injured, Ridley Grieg is injured. What's the coach and the team supposed to do with these guys injured? Oh, we don't have Pinto. Oh no. When then you see Florida just having no issues without Montour and Ekblad. Huge credit to them for that, and it makes me jealous.
Yeah, I mean, the best teams are the ones that can overcome those instances when they know which players to slot in, or they acquire the right players to slot in a pinch. And that's just a testament to how good they've been and a testament to how bad Ottawa is. So
Yep.
Florida deserved to be in there instead of Ottawa.
The other two teams in this category that I want to touch on are the Islanders and the Canucks. I feel like there's more to say about the Canucks, but just quickly on the Islanders, we had them as like just kind of on the outside of the playoffs, and I will say that I'm not super confident on them like definitely making it. I think there's still a chance that they miss, but they are in the first wildcard spot right now thanks to a lot of loser points. They definitely have the least wins. They have the least wins, yeah, of any team in both conferences that's in a playoff spot with only 18 wins, which is funny. It's only 4 more wins than the Sens, but they've got those 10 loser points. So that has them in the playoffs right now. The one thing I'll say about them is that they've been scoring a lot more goals lately than I think you would expect of them. They're not super high ranked, but they're about middle of the pack in goals. which is pretty good for their standards. You would expect them to not score at all and just win like 1-0. Noah Dobson's been awesome. Barzal, Nelson have been awesome as usual, but it's a fringe team, and I think they might slip out of the playoffs very easily, especially if we think that New Jersey is going to get in. I think you can just take out the Islanders and put New Jersey in, basically.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know if they have the talent to really keep it up for the entire season. I think they have like decent depth, but their high end talent isn't as good besides like a Barzal, Dobson, and Sorokin. Um, so I wouldn't be surprised to see them slip out, and I'm kind of surprised to see them here now. But the 10 loser points does do a lot, because when you add that to their losses right now, they're like they've lost 4 more games than they've won, and they're still in a first wild card. So that's doing a lot to prop them up, and I don't know how sustainable that is.
Exactly. And then the Canucks as the other one that I mentioned. This is in our top 3 for worst takes, because we did not even have them as a playoff team. And if I can just fact check really quickly, they're second in the league at the moment with 57 points, which is just absolutely insane. And I was not giving them any credit at all in preseason, making me feel like a complete idiot.
Yeah, I also wasn't giving them much credit. Granted, like going through this, watching this team last season, just seeing how bad it was and seeing like marginal improvement after Rick Tocchet took over, I had little faith. And honestly, the ethos of the Canucks for so long was underachieving, that I didn't really see any other path forward besides just more underachieving. And I didn't think the moves that they made their roster that much better. But clearly it did. And clearly Rick Tocchet has had a very profound impact on this team. And like listening back to interviews from last season where he was really hard on the players, basically calling them out as not working hard enough and things like that.
We need that in Ottawa.
We need that in Ottawa. Yeah. And I think that's a big reason for their turnaround, is that they don't get to just skate by and have that be acceptable. They have to play hard. And Rick Tocchet is really hammering that in. And honestly, it couldn't have come at a better time with Pettersson's contract up. So you really hope this entices him to stay. And I mean, Quinn Hughes been fantastic this season, one of the top defensemen in the league easily. So yeah, definitely top 3 worst predictions in this. But there were some mitigating factors. At the same time, though, I don't see them slipping.
They've convinced me at this point that they are still going to finish top of the division and probably top 5 in the whole league, just because I don't see any signs of them slowing down. I know that PDO is a big conversation with them, that their shooting percentage is ridiculous and they get outchanced and outshot more frequently than you would expect a team this high up in the standings. But just the elite goaltending of Demko and the just absolutely awesome offensive talent they have, I think they'll be able to keep that up for the rest of the season, even if they do take a bit of a step back next year. Like, I don't think this step back is going to happen yet. I think they're just riding a high, and they're going to be able to ride it all the way to the playoffs. And like for me, the biggest thing is their depth being better than I expected, because obviously we knew Pettersson was going to be like 100-point pace again. We know JT Miller, we know what he brings. He brings a lot of point scoring. Brock Besser, I don't think even Canucks fans expected him to score this many goals in the whole season, and he almost has 30 already. So that's a crazy resurgence. But like, the third line of Dakota Joshua, Teddy Bluger, and Connor Garland has been amazing. Every time I watch the Canucks, and they're in the highlights every night scoring goals, you would not have expected that. On defense, like Ian Cole, Carson Soucy, decent players, but I don't think anyone would have expected them to perform this well for the Canucks. And even Philip Hronik, like when they acquired him, I was like, why did they acquire him? Because in my mind, he was a offensive defenseman power play specialist for Detroit, just, you know, that heavy shot on the power play. But then they play him with Quinn Hughes, who is like obviously the offensive guy, and somehow that's a really good pairing. So I guess I totally underrated Hronik's defensive game.
I did too. I thought he was mainly an offensive defenseman, but that player has worked wonders. And just the depth in Vancouver has been able to prop them up so much, like you said. So that's just impressive. They made the right moves and they got the right players, and apparently that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
So I got to give them props. They really turned it around when I had no faith in them.
Really fun team to watch this season. And I think from there, we'll probably close it out with, of course, the Winnipeg Jets, who we did talk about in our last episode. But this is our other really bad take, is we didn't even have them in the barely missing out tier. I think we decided on putting them in the bottom tier of not even being close to the playoffs. So I would say, other than the Sens, this is our worst take in terms of like a team doing better, because the Sens is our worst take for a team doing worse. Somehow we didn't even have the Jets close to the wild card. But I will say we did our predictions before Hellebuck and Scheifele got extended, and I was of the mind that they were both just going to not extend and then get traded at the deadline. So in my mind, I was like, okay, they'll be like a little above 500 at the deadline, but then they'll have to trade these guys and then they'll suck after the deadline. But no, they both commit to Winnipeg. Hellebuck's going to win the Vezina now, and Scheifele has kind of taken his game to a whole nother level and has just been able to actually lead this team in a way that some people doubted that he could. So the Jets making us look stupid. At least you get to cheer for them, eh? Other than the Sens, you have them at least.
Exactly. As a Jets fan, I'm ecstatic about what's happening there, because then I don't have to watch my other team, which is even better.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I couldn't see this coming. Like, even as a fan, like even with that bias, I was like, nah, they don't have what it takes. They're gonna not re-sign Hellebuck and Scheifele. They're gonna get traded and they're gonna be down from there. But the moves that they made this offseason, as well as signing Scheifele and Hellebuck, has really done a lot to infuse this team with talent. Players like Gabriel Velarde have come in and been fantastic. Much better than Dubois, hilariously. Dubois was playing on the fourth line a couple of days ago, apparently. Perfetti is a great young player. Josh Morrissey, I didn't expect him to be so good offensively. I thought he was more of a defensive D as well, but these last 2 seasons have proven otherwise. Yeah, they've just been incredible. And I never expected it. And I'm going to see them play the Senators on the 20th, I think. So I'm excited for that 10-1 barn burner.
Yeah, wear some Jets gear.
I will. I actually am. I can't be asked to represent the Sens that day.
Yeah, I had a moment like that in 2019, I think it was, when the Sens traded Duchesne to the Blue Jackets. It was they played the Blue Jackets the very next day in Ottawa, so I showed up in the Blue Jackets jersey, and I had a Blue Jackets t-shirt. My sister was like, "Let me throw that on instead of Sens gear," because it was we thought that was rock bottom. Little did we know. We're still at rock bottom, or maybe we weren't even there yet. Now we're there for sure. So at least you have the Jets to cheer for.
It's crazy that it's been 4 years since that time, and it's not any better. But yeah, at least I have them. And lastly, do want to shout out Philadelphia.
Yes.
Is third in their division, which is impressive. Torts is working his magic there. Would not have expected that. And Travis Konechny is just insane. And even like lesser known players like Sean Walker have come into the lineup and done a lot better than people expected. So it's, again, a situation where Tort seems to, at least the first couple of years where he's on a new team, squeeze value out of those players that you don't really see, because he knows the right buttons to push, which, again, very impressive. And I hate to do this, but I also have to give a slight shout out to Montreal. They are ahead of Ottawa in the standings. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs, but
they're going to finish ahead of Ottawa at this point. I'll say that.
They will.
I don't think we'll even catch up to them.
No.
It's pathetic.
They're like 12 points ahead of us or something.
Unless all their players get injured again, like they did last year, and they have to call up like ECHL guys again. Sen's got that last spot in the division locked down for sure.
Locked down, Celebrini, let's go.
Yeah, and then I guess the only other one that we were kind of off on was the Coyotes. Also had them in the not even close tier. They are at least keeping themselves in the conversation. Let me double check. Yeah, 1 point back of the wild card right now. So we do have to mention them as well. Although I do think it's a team where they're probably going to slide down the standings a little bit. I would agree. I think that the goaltending from Connor Ingram has been really good, but it's unsustainable, and he's a little bit more hit and miss now lately after he had like a really good month. And the scoring depth has been good for them, but I don't think it's going to keep up. Like Michael Carconi's 14 goals. I don't think he's not gonna hit 30. He might, like, do you think he's even going to hit 25? I wouldn't bet on it.
Yeah, I wouldn't bet on it either. I mean, he's a career AHLer, so I was really surprised when he came in here and had this kind of success. I agree. I don't think it's necessarily sustainable, but I mean, I give him every opportunity to prove me wrong. Yeah,
but the Coyotes are at least fun to watch this year, which is more than I can say for multiple teams that I follow. So we definitely had to give them a shout out at least. But yeah, there you have it. That's all of our predictions from the preseason, the good ones and the bad ones. I would say top 3 bad ones are the Sens, Canucks, and Jets. We're not quite nailing it with the Canadian teams, especially also having the Oilers like second in the division and Flames in a wild card. It's entirely possible that all of that is just going to be entirely wrong. If the Oilers and Flames don't make the playoffs, it's hard to predict the NHL, man. There's always something super surprising every year, and we've had a lot of that this year. So it's been really fun to cover it, and I like looking back on these predictions and seeing where we were wrong.
I think it'll be really fun when we come back at the end of the season.
Yeah.
And just see how much it's changed, because some of these things could be moved where we're more right than we were when we talk about it now, or it's even worse than before. So yeah, it's interesting to go back and see our perspective and how things change, and to kind of look at it with hindsight as a benefit. But yeah, I mean, it's been a crazy season so far for all the media, all the stories, and it's only going to get crazier. So come back when we talk about it again at the end of the season.
Yeah, and we also had done preseason predictions in terms of some of the major player awards, which are those have probably also aged like milk from a couple of the ones that I remember saying. So that could be a fun one to revisit too, maybe a little later in the season. Those I think are a little harder to predict because it's hard to you can't predict like injuries and stuff like that. So of course, if you're talking about like, oh, McDavid is obviously going to win the Art Ross, and then like he had an injury in the first month that really slowed him down, even though he's good enough that he's back in the conversation. So those are a little harder to predict, but that could be a fun one to go over as well. So let us know if you want to see that too.
Yes, please do. And of course, you can catch us at all our regular socials at Extra Attackers and at Maude's Show, and then at Saint of Stutzel for myself. Leave us a comment if you want to see anything change about the show, or if you have any ideas on how we can improve it. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, everyone.